We did make a couple of hands crafted ones. How much for an apple? I don't know which one. Yes, and the ones with the magnet bag. Not that one, not that one. This one's a magnet.
Yeah, so as you, if you haven't already grabbed one before you leave, feel free to grab one of the magnets or buttons. But I'm gonna actually pass it over to Katrina, who's our director here, to say some words before we get into the panel today. And yeah.
Hi, okay.
Hi.
Hi. Good evening, everybody. As Marcia mentioned, my name is Katrina Ruan, and I am the interim director here at the Reuther Library. We are really excited to have you here for this event tonight. I think it's a really awesome opportunity that just so happened that our organizations are both celebrating these 50-year milestones. And so kind of coming together and talking about the ways that the work that we do intersects is a really nice way to spend this rainy evening. We didn't have plans to do anything, right? But I've written up some remarks, but I also realized, like, if you were paying attention during the tour and like looking at some of the exhibit downstairs, I don't think you really need me to tell you about back this building was born. It was opened in 75 and things like that. I just want to say that, you know, we are known, I think, quite a bit for having like the largest labor collections in North America, but I also really think it's neat that we have these collections that reflect the urban community here in Detroit through cultural organizations and political figures and things like that. So I kind of am excited that we're kind of exploring that side of things tonight. And before I just turn it over so that you guys can enjoy this really wonderful panel, I just want to say thank you to our events and exhibits team who put together a lot of this event, particularly to Marcia, who gets to play both roles. But also an archivist here. And then thank you to our preservation Detroit friends for joining us. So, really great. As telling people, I have some friends of mine that are, I think combined, we could just call this like our 100th birthday. Anniversary. Yeah, two kids combined 100 years of investment and effort around preserving history for Detroit and the community here. So that's something we're great. So yeah, thanks for being here.
So now that we've, allowed you to have a little bit of exercise, now you have some nutrients. It's a good thing, So yeah, I'm really excited. Again, my name is Marcia. I mentioned I'm the instruction outreach archivist, and I'm also on the Preservation Detroit board. I thought it was like 6 months, but I think I'm going on a year at this point, which is what you want to think about. So I, saw just the natural overlaps and thought that it would be a really amazing opportunity for us to celebrate together and talk about the connections that we see with community and why the relationship between this work are so essential to both efforts to making sure that we're preserving Detroit history. So I'm going to introduce our amazing panelists here who each offer their own lens into this question about archives, architecture, and communities, and storytelling. A lot of what we've done today is storytelling. So to start, on my left side, we have Francis Grunow, who is an urbanist working across sectors in the service of cities, especially his hometown of Detroit. Francis has experience with nonprofit organizations, urban planning, government and policy matters, community economic development, media relations, mentoring, writing, and creative endeavors. For more than 25 years, Francis has developed an eclectic set of professional relationships. He collaborates on a variety of projects and initiatives with a wide range of partners, including those in government, for-profit corporations, and nonprofit organizations.
I'm a friend to everybody.
Yeah. And then next to Francis is Sarah Lebovitz, who you've already met, is our university archivist, an amazing tour guide, an amazing storyteller. Wow. And so as an archivist for Wayne State, she handles collection development, donor relation, field work, processing, and reference for the university archives at the Reuther. She received her Master of Science in Information from the University of Michigan and studied anthropology and religion in her undergraduate. And then last but not least, we have Devan Anderson. Devan joined the Board of Directors of Preservation Detroit in February 2020. He earned a bachelor's degree in architecture from the University of Detroit Mercy in 1999. His architecture license in 2007, and is currently a senior project architect in Quinn Evans' Detroit office. He served on the Detroit Historic District Commission from March 2001 to April 2018, and was its chairperson from December 2006. Devan has been a resident of Detroit for over 20 years and was a recipient of the Spirit of Detroit Award in 2010 for his work with the Detroit Synergy Group. He is also a member of the Michigan Historic Preservation Network and the State Historic Preservation Commission. So a round of applause for all of our panelists. So I actually really want to kick this panel off with a little bit of a sentimental question, which is, what is one Detroit building that you think tells an essential story about the history of Detroit? And anybody can pick it up.
So I think it's a building that is infamous, but I forget the actual name of it, but Old Slumpy in Brooklyn, I think is sort of like the quintessential sort of story of Detroit story.
Yeah.
Like
Is
Livingston House.
Yeah.
It was a Albert Kahn, right? It was an Albert Kahn sandstone mansion in Brush Park that survived up until like the mid-90s, was moved by planning and development, was abandoned halfway through the move, and the facade started to fall off the street. Like you can find videos of it on YouTube. Like it was just, a period of time when the city was trying to do right by its architectural heritage and like just missing the boat, or like running out of cash halfway through, or like, where like all the good intentions in the world were there, and then the numbers.
Absolutely.
I probably supposed to Eric answer something like you should go first.
What?
Also, it was great.
I want to say that Devan was one of the key architects involved with a building I'm not going to name as my choice, but like I think is one of the most important, the Michigan Central train station, which is like so amazing to see that. I never would have thought. I'm very happy. But I'm not going to choose that. I'm also going to be sentimental because it's kind of in the spirit, and I'm also going to go off script because it's not a building, it's a street. It's how I fell in love with preservation and history and archives was Berry Street, Berry Avenue. And it's not one building. I mean, there are some great buildings, the Ecker House, the Freer House, there's like individual great architecture, but it's the ability of that street to tell the story through the buildings that preservation might help save. And it's just a really interesting story of Detroit through that street, from, like it being kind of pseudo-rural at the beginning of it being named after Berry, which was a seed company, and having a farm, basically a test farm at one end. So it was like they had the space to do that. To having, industrials come through it in the mid to late 19th century, build these grand mansions, with some of the most money in the United States, to 20 years later, a Jewish push through and transformation of the neighborhood with, synagogues and shuls. And then shortly after, the African-American migration along that corridor as well. In the 40s, you had these amazing institutions that service these different communities in these buildings, in terms of learning skilled trades or teaching kids about art. And then more recently, Wayne State's presence there and having this kind of institutional legacy, and it's still transforming. You have that Glass Blue, which is a huge reinvestment in one of the historic structures there. So it's like this continuing churn of people and ideas and investment that could have been lost but for Preservation Way. And that was the the street that as a Cass Tech high school student, I was given as an assignment to look at the archives of both from the city's perspective, like the city directory. So I fell in love with Berry Street, but also preservation and history and archives that way. So that's my personal one. So the street.
I'm so glad I let you go before me. Okay, so, no, it's fine. I'm not from Detroit, so I'm from between Cleveland and Akron originally. And, did someone know it? Later, I always say between Cleveland and Akron, so like, I will not say I'm from either place. I'm like 15 minutes away from Kent State, everyone knows it, very unfortunately. Okay, so Steph. Oh, Hudson, hello. Very funny, great, this is hilarious. But, so Detroit, okay, picking one is so hard. I'm gonna do one and then I'm gonna do a stop second because I have to. When I think of like, what do I show off to people when they come here? We're going to Belle Isle and we're gonna look at the aquarium. And we're going to take a step back into time and imagine a time where like, and Belle Isle still is a highly accessible space. It's a beautiful park. The aquarium is very strange, but very beloved. In a good way. We just had a student process records of someone who in 2005 was like dedicated to trying to keep the aquarium open. So being able to know some of the things that happened around Belle Isle and like, it's beautiful. If you need a spot of green in our very dreary Michigan winters, that's where you can go when it's open. And they've done so much work to make sure that it stays beautiful and just I love it. When I see anything that has that shape on it, I'm so excited. The other one has to be, we were talking about it a little bit, but the other one I always tell people like, hey, if you've never been to Detroit, there are many buildings, but also the Fisher Building. Because what I want people to think about is the whole story of the city from not quite beginning, right? We began way before 1920, but put yourself into 1920 when we are flush with cash and we're building these truly gorgeous structures that are unlike things like, people know a couple, but Fisher Building to me, they're beautiful. So that was my sneaky second. And I won't talk too much about that one.
Thank you so much. And honestly, I was just to keep it with the thing from my grandma's house. But honestly, like it's the background of many family memories and photos and things. So that feels like a really important space for me. Northwest side, I'm going to tell you all of my street business. But so I want to offer a moment. 50th anniversary is a really big deal, and so much changes in 50 years. And so I want to pose kind of a different question to each of you, which is, what has changed in the building over the past 50 years? And Sarah, I know that you have not been here. I don't think anybody's been here. So from your perspective, the history that what has changed? And then I want to offer the same question to Francis and Devin around based on, what you understand about Preservation Wayne, transitioning to Preservation Detroit, what has changed over that period of time and what has been kind of like the catalyst for those changes. Can anybody comment?
I'll start. No, I'm not a very well-preserved ghost. So the Reuther, we opened our doors. Tomorrow is really our 50th birthday, May 23rd. Like truly, this is the cusp of our 50th. Like the day we opened was tomorrow, but 50 years ago. Do that math a little bit. So one thing is that I think the importance of the labor movement, I'm going to go non-building for a second, just because
it's more than just a building.
It's more than just a building, which is what we thought of as the exhibit committee. We were like, great, what's our tagline for the building? And then the song has to get stuck in everybody's head. More than a feeling. So the importance of the labor movement has obviously shifted, right? Over the past 50 years. We've seen a lot of changes. So that's one thing for me is, we in the sixties understood how important and relevant it was to collect the records of working people at a time when other archives weren't really that interested. That's very different now. There are many archives who would like the materials that we have. And it's partly because we cared and we wanted to be custodians and we wanted to tell the story of the labor movement from the rank and file members to the presidency to international. So we've tried to hit all of those different types of stories. And, you know, you can see the importance of labor throughout the 50 years in the researchers that we have who don't just research, you know, labor 100 years ago, they're researching labor from 15 years ago, from 20 years ago, they're doing it throughout the entire thing. So one really big thing for us, I think, as a building is how has the labor movement shaped the research that has happened here from our opening to now. The other, I mean, we're getting a facelift, which we're all really excited about. One really great note, some of our really important collections are here because of our building. So our beautiful AV archivist, Elizabeth Clemens, who is maybe sitting over there or is maybe upstairs, she let me know that when our wing was built in 1991 and when we got that cold storage that Marcia was talking about, that's when we got one of our biggest photograph collections, the Detroit News Photo Morgue. And it's partly because we had state-of-the-art cold storage and could care for the materials. So the building not only, you know, has meaning in the stuff that's inside of it, but it's also, it has meaning in the way that it preserves the stuff inside of it. So it's both the content and the form, whether that's digital or AV format or paper format. So those are some of the changes. It's, you know, how are we adapting to ensure that we are doing the best we can to preserve the stuff that we've been given custodianship over? How are we making sure that stuff becomes available to people? How are we providing access where we can? We had a discussion on the tour of like, why can't we digitize everything? But how are we still ensuring that our mission remains the same? You know, 50 years ago, we were doing the same things, and hopefully 50 years from now, not to have a precious moment, but hopefully 50 years from now, we'll still be doing the important work that we do, both for Detroit and Urban Affairs for Wayne State University, which has a while, like I've been in this role for 6 months and I've learned so many weird things about this university and all of the faculty and students who have come through, who have gone on to do amazing things. So that's just a small part of it for me. Thank you.
I really appreciate the idea that it's, you know, more than a building is what this is about. And actually it took me a while in some ways to understand sort of intellectually and emotionally, because architecture is something that you're drawn to, your eyes, you know, see something and you sort of like appreciate it on one level, but understanding that, you know, it's like the people that make up the insides of it and you know, really what it's about. I am 51, so just in case I have been around. I do remember actually in Elstone High School, I'm building the addition, and I think I could be wrong that all of the activities remained, or some of them did, while the construction was going. I thought there was that part of it too. Again, I could be wrong, but I remember that interesting concept for you know, America, at least the United States. So many times we just, you know, eliminate, you know, knock something down and build it again. But the idea that things get additions, or you know, you can integrate something, that was cool about this building project. I remember, and the technology of it. I think one thing that strikes me too that I'm still wrestling with, and maybe some of you are too, just, you know, what academia and institutions have meant over the years, and how that's changing, maybe unfortunately now, in terms of, you know, how as a society we view these kind of spaces and how we think about them and invest in them. You know, and thinking about the future, which I think we'll get to, it's like, I don't want to necessarily go there, but just the idea that a place like this has had such an important impact on this field and in Detroit as a place where these records are sent, stored, and having that be part of this neighborhood and this, Wayne State and Detroit is really a cool thing that, again, sort of like, a lot of Detroit, I think we take for granted, and this is something that, I think we really should be proud of and prouder of over time, especially as some of these ideas and issues, get questioned maybe and aren't given the sort of import they are to building our society and our national identity. So I think this is as important a place as it's ever been, and we should be, we should guard it and hallow it and invest in it going forward. There you go. That's right. Yeah.
We have recorded this.
And I think, not to be like overly dystopian, but to riff on what Francis was saying, there may be a time in the not so near future when knowing about the labor of the 20th century is going to be super fascinating to people in the future, because we may not do that anymore. And it will tell a story about who we were as a people that people have grown out of touch with, which I think is sort of the segue to my opinion about some of this stuff is, and I may have mentioned this, other people, I walk my dog past this building probably once a week. When I go to work, I work by McDonald's, which is another weird segue between the Big Mac stuff from upstairs. I know, right? And I'd never been in it. I didn't know anything about it. And knowing that, it was designed by Lukenbakken, who he's actually a fairly long-standing architect in the city. I think most recently with Lukenbakken Ziegelman, who partnered alternately with a great number of people over the years. So knowing that this was work is fascinating. Knowing what happens in here is fascinating. Like just knowing the story of this place, because like I always knew it was a labor archive, and I always knew its name, and I always knew it was here, but that's all I knew. It wasn't a place for me. It was like a thing I passed. And then also understanding that you guys have the archives for the organization that I love and run, and have helped steward some of that organizational history, and not to air out organizational dysfunction, but small nonprofits, especially ones that are turning 50, have lost control of their history and their story, and to have had you guys help anchor that, at least at one end, because there is a huge amount of my inactive brain space that is taken up with the 100 file boxes that I still have in my office full of records that we've been trying to figure out a way to get to you guys in a way that isn't constructive. So, and to hear that you guys had, and to hear that you guys have records about Coleman Young, and the jokes about reading juicy correspondence. He sent more than his fair share of juicy correspondence to Frustration Detroit. And that, again, that's like a small nonprofit with a very small yearly income. Our history is overwhelming to us. Like even understanding who we are as new board members is sometimes really intimidating. So knowing that there are people out there to help us with it is comforting. Knowing that it's important to people, knowing that this archive has viewed our organization's history as important enough to the story of the city and the labor movement here to give us space, is touching, frankly, it's amazing.
Beautiful. Oh, this is such a exciting. And we already kind of started talking about the intersection between archives and architecture. And we had a really beautiful presentation that Elizabeth led, where she pulled some materials from the preservation main collection. And so I have a question, which is, in your perspective, in what ways do you think archives can breathe new life into a building's legacy and influence its future use?
I think working with my day job at Grunow, we have a staff of historians, and they lean on archives very heavily. And in the preservation that we do, and there is a large part of our work that isn't just as rewarding as projects like the train station are. And we do work sort of all across the country. There's a large part of our work that is research-based, that is history of the place, that is understanding the context and the community of the structures that we're trying to save and their place in it. As we put together not just documents to restore a building, but perhaps documents about how to manage and take care of something that is important to the community over the long term. To let sort of as the opposite side of the coin, as I'm over here complaining about how Preservation Detroit has absolutely lost control of its legacy, to help organizations with important structures get back in touch with their legacy. Because the amount of work it takes to do that research, is impossible for the people that we work with. You know, it's a full-time job for people that they've hired, and they have nobody on staff stewarding their waste. And it makes projects when we have the opportunity to both do that deep dive into the history and then also renovate the building that much more rewarding, because we get a fuller, more complete picture of the projects that we work on in a way that you don't get when you're going to a site that's a green field and erecting some monument to your own ego. You know, it's a part of architecture that has really drawn me.
And I do want to add that one of my favorite values or concepts that I always kind of grounds the work that I do in archiving is this idea of Sankofa. And so Sankofa is a West African Ibra symbol and concept. You might see it sometimes on Detroit architecture, the houses. There's two symbols. One is a bird that's reaching back with an egg on its back. And then there's one where it's kind of a heart that kind of curls, which you oftentimes will see that on people's screen doors and things like that. But so the definition is to go back and get it. And so it's this idea that in order to build a better future, that we have to go back and remember our stories, remember our past. So a lot of Devan, what you just said, sounds like embracing that principle of like, you know, you need to know where you came from. That's an important part of thinking about where we go in the future. Anybody else want to hop into that question?
I was telling you, I think, about, I sort of see like a parallel track for myself being a researcher. And whenever I don't do that professionally per se, but I have done it quite a bit over my life. And when I was the executive director of preservation Wayne at that point, and I felt like I didn't get to do it enough, but it wasn't really the job title. It was, you know, trying to run an organization. But I just love it, you know, when you get into, and you get the opportunity to sort of like follow a thread and track a story. And when you have it revolve around a building or buildings or a neighborhood, you know, it gives you kind of like a framework, an infrastructure to like poke into addresses and understand, at least in Detroit, that the addresses change, you know, at some point. Understand, you know, who lived there and why they, and you know, not just their names, but you know, how they were called and what they were, you know, doing at the time. Understanding, you know, the context of the document that you're looking at, even where, you know, you could look at a directory. I'll just use that as an example, like the city directory, and you can look and find someone's name and that's associated with a business. And then you look at the business and where that was, and you know, and then you start telling yourself, or you can tell yourself whatever you want. You can concoct stories, but they can make a certain logical sense, so that you can start to put kind of a trail of breadcrumbs together in terms of like, well, okay, this person, you know, this is my wife, we're slowly renovating an old house that has an interesting story. And I won't get into all of it, but just one of them was like, this is the person, this is the job, and this is business. And it's like, okay, well, how did he get to work in 1897? Well, he was right off of Woodward. He probably took, a streetcar, and thinking about what that, day might have been like, and how, at that time it was at the edge of the city, like the urbanized area, but it was still accessible, and it was, the business had an ad in the city directory, and it matches up something you found with something you found in the attic. Just those kinds of things, can reveal themselves in ways that make you, or make me at least, very excited about how having places like this can fill in these pictures and help, not only help tell a story, but help you understand the context of the the built environment and the people and the place in ways that are surprising and compelling, and like you were saying, like can take you down rabbit holes that might end you someplace completely different. So there's an essential transaction that happens between these ideas and places like this.
So I'm gonna pause for a question, and I am gonna give, you have a response?
Sure, the reason I have my phone is because I have goldfish brain sometimes, so I'm just reading. You sent us the questions on that, remind me what, yeah.
Okay, wait, well, hold on, let me close out the panel with one last question, and then we'll take a couple questions from the audience. So in 50 years, what do you hope to see in the future for historical preservation in Detroit?
Money.
Money. I think money is a really good one.
Now, I was giving a tour of a building we've been discussing, and somebody asked me about sort of the future of the technical material nature of preservation. And I feel like there's, like we're not done yet. And there's a lot where it's sort of like an old saw of old buildings, which is that old growth wood that's used in a lot of the structures around the city of Detroit is a material unlike any material yet. Like it is so alien in terms of its properties and its capacities in terms of its use as a construction material that you'd almost have to look at something that isn't wood to find something similar to it. And I think in terms of the technical aspect of preservation, I think there's a hope that we get sort of closer and better at replicating materials that are longer lasting and do a better job of maintaining the structures that we need to maintain, whatever those materials might be. I think on a completely different tangent, I think there's a lot that's been happening, and I'll say this century, which is a funny thing to say, in the fields of historic preservation. And I was talking with some of our guests from the HDAB today about a lot of the stories that we weren't researching in the last century, and how those stories are part of the stories we're trying to tell about historic preservation. In a lot of the ways, I think that Francis was researching what we go out. We're creating more complete stories of places. And I think that's really important. And ties into the work of this archive pretty tight. But it's not just inclusivity. It gets back to this idea of community and completeness and a fuller understanding of where we live and what its history is.
You guys want to keep up?
Okay, so partly what I hope for 50 years into the future around preservation is that we in our work have been able to help inspire other people in their work. I think that's part of what we hope currently, right? Is that we bring people in, we talk to them about the work that we do and the resources that are available to them, but also make them think of themselves currently situated in a moment in time and how they're thinking about their own history. Marcia, we've talked about this both together, and you talk about this with classes too, like teaching students, teaching current people going through classes about how they are in history, weirdly, and it won't feel like that until 5 years from now, 10 years from now, but you're in it now. So part of what I hope is that we continue being able to bring that message out to anybody who's interested in hearing it, and help keep the passion for historical preservation alive, even if it just means people, I always call it like pulling on the thread, right? You pull on one thread and there are 12 other threads and all of a sudden you're like, oh no, like I said this one on our tour a little, I don't remember which part, but researchers come in, they start researching one thing because they know we have the collection and they realize, oh no, we have like 70 other collections and they have one more day left in the building. So part of me just hopes that we can help keep preserving that history so that people can pull the thread and find the person who lived in their house and then find the business that they worked at through, you know,
Yeah, right.
the city directory,
Right.
find ads for those, maybe somehow stumble across a photo of their father or like something random and fortuitous where all of a sudden you encounter something that sparks that feeling inside of you of like, I want to know more about this and I want to ensure that people 50 years from now can also do this and encounter it in their time.
I'm thinking 50 years from now, technologically, I can't even imagine it. It's like hard to imagine because things have changed so much, you know, in the last 10 years, in the last 20 years, and the whole like move to digital art, you know, whatever this brave new world of like how we keep track of, you know, ourselves through society, which I think, you know, is also maybe part of the issue with how we're dealing with it all. That's a whole other thing. But just in terms of like the project, you know, like your project at the library, right? The photo.
Oh, like on the
But-
street view.
Yeah, Black Bottom Street View, which to me was like, it alluded to, I mean, it was an amazing thing to see, just to like physically see the photographs, but it alluded to me a potential for something that I've, you know, thought about, which is like, you know, going into the past through technology in ways that give you a sense and feel for what that place might have been like. And I could easily see that being the case in 50 years and 10 years. I mean, we're sort of dabbling in that already with VR. And I don't know if that's like necessarily good or bad in the sense of like, you know, it's like certainly very interesting and, you know, an experience. I think it could be really amazing to do like an exhibit like that, but actually walk the streets of Black Bottom in a way that is like, you know, but how is that different than a video game? I mean, there's some like questions I have about it, but I think that being able to experience these things will be a lot more present in our you know, capabilities technologically, and then what we do with them as like, you know, institutions, as archives, as educators, or just like, you know, how do we use those to tell stories and learn from? I think the question that I hope, you know, has better or, you know, good outcomes. But the technology to me is very compelling in terms of what we will be able to see and experience, think about in ways that we can only sort of, you know, concretely put together now, or, you know, more in recent times.
I think it's still 2 minutes. It reminded me of something.
Yeah.
Can I?
Oh, I don't know. Sorry. Yeah.
So I've had kind of the craziest, most whirlwind day of running around today. But immediately before coming here, I was meeting with a partner architect firm to help explain to them something that Quinn Evans does that very few other architecture firms do. And it's something called Historic Building Information Management, abbreviated as HBIM, or called a digital twin. And we're actually partnering with the company that does the software for building modeling to develop this in conjunction with them. Like, we have people that work for us who are like building sensors to put in buildings to send data to this model. And to talk about like the difference between how things have changed and how they might change and how completely unpredictable that is. You know, upstairs we saw a lot of the work that Preservation Wayne had done, documenting historic structures and writing reports and taking photos, and we saw pieces of paper with photos stapled to them. And like, to compare that to now, we have a model that the state of Michigan uses to manage the state capitol that's been up and running for a year. That we digitally scanned the building. So they went inside with a laser and at like microscopic increments, scanned every part of that building, top to bottom. We constructed a model to digitally replicate it that somebody can manipulate and interact with in a purely digital environment. And then inserted all the data from the records that the state of Michigan had about the state capitol. So there is a glass floor in the atrium of the center of the state capitol, and you can go into this model and know the date that every glass panel in that floor was installed. Who by, like all the data that the state of Michigan had about that glass floor is in this digitally manipulated model. And it's been up for a year, and they have real-time data on every room in that building, temperature and humidity on 5-minute increments for the last 365 days. It's going to continue forever. And they use that for managing their maintenance personnel, which is something I hadn't learned before 2 hours ago. And their head of maintenance for the state capitol wakes up, grabs a cup of coffee, and opens this model. And he can see highlighted in the model all the open work orders, who on his staff is doing what, where, what is long-term overdue and what is recently completed. And before he leaves the house to head to his day full of meeting, can have a really good understanding of what's going on. And this was supposed to be short, but to understand the difference between what we saw upstairs and what we're doing at the state capitol, and how that's separated by 50 years. And to think about how aggressively things are advancing, hopefully, hopefully things continue to advance. Not to be too dark and post-apocalyptic, but
It's looking for what there. Not maybe over there.
to think about where things might be in the next 50 years. To think about who we were 50 years ago and to think about that difference, and then think about where we might be, like it's unknowable. It's fundamentally unknowable to me.
I mean, one thing I always like to tell people about archives is that we're often guessing a lot about what future generations are actually going to need. So when we're making decisions about what to keep, what to label, what to organize, we're making guesses about what is the structure that's going to be most helpful for researchers that exist today and researchers that are going to exist in the future. So a lot of this preservation work is guessing work, because it's all a value system. A lot of, what we're choosing to preserve is a representation of the values that we have that shift over time. And so, doing the best we can, making the most educated guesses and, trying to keep the things. And there's a lot to be said about what's at risk in a digital sense, right? Like I don't, the types of conversations we're having about that look a little bit differently than how we talk about some of the physical materials, but there is a very real risk to digital things and like pros and cons with both sides. And
How
so,
long do CDs last? How do you get stuff off a zip drive?
right.
Like all this old crazy archaic media that's still floating around out there.
You donate your USB to an archive that has a computer that has a USB reader. And then we go, I don't know, maybe there's something on here, but I can't open it. And then we call IT and then we go, do you know how to get this open?
Me and Molly, who's so what did the every archivist had a moment with a flash drive? We're sitting at a computer and trying to figure out a flash drive. So it's, even in this moment,
Yes.
right? Like there's so many complications and things.
Yeah.
But did you have?
I was gonna say, I can't let this end without saying, one thing that's really, I feel a great honor to have this as an archivist, because we get to see so much history, we also see how history is so cyclical. So 50 years ago, there were people who thought, it's really important for us to put a group together to try to fight for some of these historical things. And now, 50 years later, that group is still working to do those same things, even if it does look completely different.
Right.
Maybe there are sensors and cool 3D mapping things and not just people taking stuff off of a wall and sticking it on a piece of paper. But it'll be really interesting to see 50 years later, how is the same group with the same, heart, right, of wanting to preserve this stuff. How are they able to do things we weren't able to, or figure out stuff we weren't able to get? That's it. That's all I have.
Beautiful. Can we get a round of applause? I want to leave space for 1 or 2 questions, but I want to honor the time of the archivists that have been here since some of them 9 a.m., 8:30, 8 in that range. So I know there was a question here, and then you had a question as well.
It's actually mostly a comment.
Oh,
It's one of the main reasons I came. But anyway, I'm a librarian. I worked in an Emil Lorch building for 21 years. And I also worked on the Preservation Wing archives for many years. And going back to the year 2000. And in 2001 was the birthday of the city of Detroit, and the birthday. And that's when, in 2000, the group decided that they were going to start walking tours. It was the first major walking tours for preservation. And we had like 6 tours going on. And guess where everyone wanted to go?
Belle Isle.
To the archives. To the Preservation Wing archives, to all the files that we had. Well, we don't have enough time to go into all that. All I can say is those people were so excited, and they rifled through all those files, and it was a mess. But they made the most wonderful tour. Okay, they had wonderful. You probably been on my haven't I had to go on. But anyway, fast forward. We got federal grant, and then it was really sad because the person that was in charge of the grant had to leave, and I was the only librarian around at the time. So I had to follow through on the federal grant, and we got it, and, it all worked out. But then we looked at our files and we said, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? Because all these tour people are trying to, do research. And so for 3 years, I worked on the archives Preservation Wing. I worked with librarians, and it was mostly another librarian and me, but there were like 3 or 4 of us that worked on them. So we were in those files. We set up the room for people to go in and use the archive room and everything. It was delightful. It was a lot of fun. And then not too long after that was when you had to start vacating, the building. But anyway, so I've got all the information, and on my computer at home, I have, documents going back to 2000, So I've got all sorts of stuff, and I even brought some of the things with me, but, but imagine, and please put out a call, because I'm sure there are a lot of people out there like me that were connected with the organization that still have things, and, get us to bring them in. When my condo flooded, 3 years ago, Lewis Jones did come over and did rescue some of the things from my condo, but I still have things. I didn't leave everything in the basement. But there's a lot of us out there that have stuff, though.
We'll take all your contact information.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I was just gonna make a comment, so, I'm also a past Preservation Wing board member. But I work for the city of Detroit, for the Historic Designation Office with my colleague Kelsey over here. You had asked the question, how has preservation changed over 50 years? And, I would say back when I was on the board in the 90s, obviously our battles were buildings that were very well known. The Hudson's building, Madison Lennox, before that, the Shane House. Buildings that were sort of iconic, well-known, historic buildings. We still fight over a few of those. Our office is getting ready to do a public hearing for the PA building, which is across the street, Michigan Central. So all of you are invited to come to that public hearing on June 12th. But I think what's been most, really sort of wonderful about the preservation movement over the past decade or more is not only brought up hardwood wood, that people are finally realizing preservation is also about sustainability. It's not just about the perfect architectural specimen of a style, it's also about just retention of materials, and that it makes sense for us to reuse as much as we can while we're on this earth. But the other thing is, one thing that's been really wonderful at the Historic Designation Advisory Board is that we have people come to us all the time we want to have the grandmother's house recognized, right? Or in the case of our work, we just, we're right now working on the home of Rosa and Raymond Parks, which is just a simple 2-flat on Virginia Park that has really no architectural, master element to it that anyone could say. It's all about the history. It's all about who made an impact in the lives of so many. It just happens to be where she lived. We last year designated one called the Deaf Sound House, which is owned by Dale, who was, again, an early producer, innovator, electronic music, and just designated his house, which is just a little post-war house that could be anywhere in Northwest Detroit. So anyway, my point is, you also asked the question about value system as it relates to archives. Same with our built environment. One person may look at a house and think it looks irrelevant. At the end of the day, it's really about the story behind that place. So anyway, kudos to Reuther and Preservation Detroit for bringing this program together, because it's great synergy. And I'll give a shout out, Devan, that we are trying to plan a 50th event in the beginning of November for Preservation Detroit, so you'll all hear about it soon, and hopefully you'll be involved. And we'll keep commemorating Reuther with it.
Beautiful words to close on. Be here, let you all be here, about letting you know how you can support and stay in contact with us. So in the context of Preservation Detroit, this is one of a series of lectures that have already happened and some that are going to be planned for the rest of the year. So you guys are already connected, because otherwise we wouldn't be here. So you know, stay tuned about future lecture series and our official 50th anniversary celebration. And in the context of the Reuther, we will continue to have more beautiful programs that allow folks to come in and experience this building as not this intimidating concrete structure that you walk past, but as a place with people who are making memories and doing the work to make sure that the history of Detroit, the labor movement, the university are all preserved and accessible. So if you want to support that work, you can sign up, sign in and leave your email, because we are building a newsletter. And then you can also make a donation. Visit our website, reuther.wayne.edu. There's a donation situation there. But then also, when you come, ways you can take 10 pictures and then you can pay, or you can pay $10 to take as many photos as you want. So those are some ways to plug in. But also just tell people that we are free and accessible to the public. No ID required. Yeah. And same-day service. Where do you find that at?
Friendly, warm, friendly, on staff, waiting to hear your burning questions. All the time.
Yeah.
Not 24 hours.
Not 24 hours. So on your way out, feel free to talk, build community here, and grab some cookies and fruit and water on your way out. And then hopefully we see you again as a researcher.
Thank you.